We're continuing something today I'll call a virtual tour. We're talking to a number of Republican state legislators from here in Idaho over the course of a few days. In fact, we've got someone scheduled on Wednesday morning of next week. And these are people who aren't necessarily from the Magic Valley, but on the other hand, they represent a thought process that is near and dear to a lot of people who live in this area. I think that's a good way to put that. I jokingly said to some friends this morning online, it's our tour of rebellious Republicans. At least that's how mainstream media would like to categorize them. Mainstream media is constantly looking to put people into a box, one place or another, and say this is what they are. So this must be therefore exactly what they believe. And I think that that's not always the case. We were joined by Priscilla Giddings yesterday. This morning, we're joined by State Representative, and I want to point out, too, he's from one of the most beautiful towns in all of Idaho. He's from over in the Rexburg area, and that is State Representative Ron Nate. And first of all, sir, welcome to our program.
Good morning, Bill. It's a pleasure to be on.
I was going to say, when I mentioned the mainstream media, you get a lot of press, but it's not always because media seems to like you, and I guess that means you're doing something, and perhaps doing something right.
You know, the media should send me and some of my colleagues here a thank you card because if it wasn't for us, I don't know what they would be reporting on.
We have just a few days before the end of this session, and it has been a session that has there have been, I think, some very quiet moments. I think this is a good way to describe it. Very quiet moments, and then there have been some moments of some very heated discussion and the like. And of course, that's a reference to some of the media coverage you sometimes get. But here we are in those
Yeah.
closing days. Closing days. Anything that people should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, let me address a couple of things there. First of all, some of your listeners may be aware that the media tried to beat me up for what they call a hot mic comment. I was having a discussion during a recess on the floor with a colleague about teacher pay. All session long, I've been pointing out how there's overspending items in some of these budget bills that are coming across. I've been identifying them and actually keeping track of them. And on a daily basis, I've been standing up on the floor of the House and saying how much money we've overspent and that could have been put toward teacher pay, for example. And for example, up to this point, I've identified 37 bills that had what I call overspending items for a total of $18.8 million, and that could translate into teacher salaries of about $1,200. I was having a conversation about that on the floor with a colleague. She says, well, do you want to have more teacher pay or more teachers? And I said, well, more teacher pay, and we discussed it for 5 minutes. At some point in the conversation, I slipped and said, teachers are overpaid. But no, I really meant that we're overspending in other areas and teachers are underpaid. Well, the media doesn't allow for human slip-ups like that. And so actually, if you listen to the full recording, I'm exactly right. The entire conversation was about paying teachers more. But anyway, I just wanted to clear that up. So any listeners out there that have this misconception that I say one thing in public and the other thing in private. And by the way, my tracking of that overspending has caused some discomfort, I'd say, with some of my colleagues. They're used to coming over here and spending up the money with no questions asked. My asking the questions has made some of them uncomfortable, to say the least.
Well, even if you had referenced that some teachers may have been overpaid, I think we are all aware that no matter where you work, there are some people who work very hard. Then there are the people who do the job well, but they just stick to what the requirements are. And then you always have I remember I worked for the Postal Service, and a third of the people showed up and worked very hard. A third seemed to do the job well, and then about a third seemed to be mailing it in, no pun intended. And so there's somewhere out there, there's probably somebody that is doing that. But for the sake of argument on this, it does seem that media itself works the same no matter where you are. Because if you look at what the president does, no matter what happens, they try to cast it in the worst light. And you're part of a small cluster of legislators that no matter what you do, it seems that you're always going to get the worst possible coverage.
Oh, absolutely. And I cleared it up with the reporters right away. They said, did you say that? And I said, if I said that, I misspoke because the entire conversation was about paying teachers more. I cleared it up with them. But are they interested in honesty? Are they interested in getting the story right? No, they saw this as a gotcha moment, and it's a liberal media. And I know you're in the media, and this would not apply to you, Bill, but this was an example of fake news at work. They knew the opposite to be true, but they saw an opportunity to stick it to a conservative. And, I'm a puzzle for them. I'm a conservative that's supportive of public education. They don't know what to do with me.
You are, as I understand, you have a lot of classroom experience yourself.
Yes, I do. I'm an economics teacher at BYU, Idaho. I've been there for 16 years.
I guess that would qualify as somebody who knows a little bit about education. And number two, we're getting very close to, I guess, finalization of an education budget. Anything in particular that we should have a uh, should we be nervous or should we be glad? I don't know what's going to come out of all of this.
Well, we came to the Capitol in January, and as with the last few years, there has been revenues that have come in over projections, and so we've had money on the table that is greater than we ever thought we'd have. This session it peaked at about $140 million that we had in the state coffers that we didn't expect to have there. Now, Idaho is supposed to be a conservative state, and so I would think, oh, $140 million. It's clear that we are taxing people too much if the revenues are coming in over projections year after year. My first instinct is let's stop the overtaxation. Let's allow people to keep more of what they earn. They've earned it; it's their right. And so my first instinct is let's go cut taxes. And so I've been working on a grocery tax repeal. Senator Bear over there has his grocery tax repeal that he's actually worked into a bill that got amended on there yesterday, and that's one to watch out for. House Bill 67 is going to be considered on the Senate floor probably next week and then sent to the House.
I
That's
understand.
an opportunity for.
Well, I
Yeah, go ahead.
understand from yesterday. I was reading one of your colleagues, Heather Scott, has a newspaper column up in Bonners Ferry, and she said that in the House that has been a much more problematic bill trying to get any traction with it when it comes to forgiving the tax on groceries. Then I read this morning where the Senate looks like it's in favor. So how do you end up reconciling the two?
Well, I'll tell you what, the grocery tax repeal should be a no-brainer because, first of all, it's easy to do. There's technology to do it. Other states are doing it. We already have definitions on what groceries are and what groceries aren't. It's an easy one to do. We have states that border us that don't have taxes on groceries, that don't even have sales taxes at all. To be competitive with them, we ought to be lowering our grocery sales tax. This is a bill that has 48 co-sponsors. That's not people that are just agreed to vote for it. Those are people that have signed on as if they would be writing the bill as well, and that's unheard of here. But the grocery tax repeal, it got just held in the chairman's drawer in the House Revenue and Taxation Committee, and so they found a way to attach it to a bill over in the Senate. Kudos to them. Kudos to Senator Bear and his colleagues that are responding to what the people want. This has broad support, and it ought to be heard, ought to get an up and down vote. If it was, up to the House Revenue and Taxation Committee chair, it would still be sitting in the drawer.
I have a fear, and I just want to remind people we're at 8:15 right now, and it's 41. Our guest is State Representative Ron Nate. He's joining us this morning. He represents the Rexburg area. And we do want to point out you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Bill Colley with you on Top Story as well. I have a feeling that a lot of times, because of that group of, I heard the comment from one of your colleagues' mothers the other day was telling me that you're known as the six pack. There's a group of you that seems to be vilified in media and sometimes by leadership that even if you come up with a good bill and a good proposal, somebody is going to stop it in effect just to in a move to basically say we'll show them.
Yeah, well, I think the thing, by the way, six pack is kind of fun and kind of flattering, but I'll tell you what, the numbers are growing higher than that. It's not just a small little group. There's more and more of us that are hearing that the people are really interested in returning the power to the people and having the system work from the bottom up instead of the top down. And I think people are also noticing that the committee process, I think, is broken. that our Constitution says there's only one person here in the Capitol that has the ability to veto a bill, and that's the governor. However, the way the process has evolved, we have 14 committee chairs in the House, 14 in the Senate, that are each exercising, in effect, veto power because they say that they just don't want to hear a bill. Well, that's when people want things like repealing the SBAC test or repealing Common Core or repealing Obamacare in Idaho. Those are things that we are trying to do for the people. And when a committee chair puts it in a drawer, that's frustrating for the people. And I think this session, the people are starting to notice, and that there are a growing group of legislators that are truly interested in working for the people and not the typical establishment gravy train special interest politicians.
When you reference the fact that you're seeing more and more support, a couple of years ago that would have been a 2-pack and not a 6-pack. So the numbers have tripled as far as that particular nickname. But I have a feeling that this is a trend, and if a trend is developing, then the folks in leadership should take notice of that and start looking for ways to, how shall we put it in Rodney King terms, can't we all just get along?
Exactly. And, there was some attention drawn to the House floor debate a week or so ago about we actually tried to call a bill out of committee that was being held in a drawer. So we invoked one of the House rules and had a healthy debate on the process. And if you look at that debate, I know they try and cast us who are voting with the Republican platform and voting conservatively that we are somehow extreme. But if you look at that debate, we're very statesmanlike in our approach. We were invoking the rules, and if you see any antics going on in the House, those are coming from establishment. When they tried to close down the House while one of our representatives was reading a bill, that was an antic. Reading the bill is constitutional. That's what we should be doing. But to close down the House for that and try and embarrass a representative, uh, we're starting to see some of them get unhinged a little bit because they do see that the people are frustrated with the process. And there's some here that are willing to represent them, and we're happy to do their work.
Representative Ron Nate joining us this morning. If you can hold on the line, we've got a short break. We'll talk a bit more after that. He's going to be with us for a time this morning. It's 45 right now. Well, no, that temperature is dancing all around one. It just keeps flipping in front of me as I'm reading the screen here. We're at 20 minutes after 8 o'clock on Top Story. Reminder to folks, now that we're getting into spring, you might be thinking as things dry out, it's time to actually do a home remodel or even perhaps just a kitchen or a bathroom or perhaps even a basement. We've been recommending if you're going to be doing that, you consider a high end remodel in the sense that it will add great value to your property. And I've been sharing the story of seeing one of these projects taking place in Cassia County. And that is because Western Visions Inc. has stepped in and is doing this high end work. And I'd like to remind you, you can get in touch with them a couple of ways. Probably the best, though, right now is to go to the website, western-visions.com. And they'll come out and they'll make sure that you are included in every aspect of that remodel as well. As I said, 20 minutes after 8 o'clock, we're at 41. More with Ron Nate on the way. We'll continue our conversation with State Representative Ron Nate in just a moment. We're at 41. It's 822. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Just a quick note, if you're listening this morning, always thank you. But if you're struggling with hearing the program, you may need to see someone who can actually help you with your hearing. We've been recommending Dr. Christine Pickup, a doctor of audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. Now, why would you actually select Dr. Pickup? Independence. Mount Harrison Audiology is the only independent, locally owned hearing healthcare practice in southern Idaho, which means more choices for treatment than just one brand and lower costs. Trust your hearing to a certified audiologist. Call Mount Harrison Audiology for your appointment today. The number 312-0957. That's 312-0957. Representative, I think a good place to jump off here is just the efforts that you're trying to make when it comes to transparency and the way government is actually done in Boise. Are there any particular highlights that we've seen so far this year that maybe are moving us in that direction?
Yeah, I think the heightened attention on the process and how committee work is done. I've mentioned bills being held in committee chair drawers. Well, let's look at the fruits of that process. Over the past few years, we've had a massive gasoline tax and registration fee increase. It was passed, 1 a.m. on the last day of the session. We've adopted the Obamacare health insurance exchange here in conservative Idaho. We This year, in this last week, they're talking about increasing our debt by using Garvey bonds to fund our transportation needs to the tune of $300 million. Now, I mentioned we came here with a budget surplus. We should not be borrowing money to meet our needs. We should be cutting taxes. We shouldn't be spending it up. There's some good bills that are being held. The Castle Doctrine bill, the bill to allow everyone in Idaho to carry without a permit, carry concealed weapons without a permit, non-residents as well. The income tax cut got held in the Senate. There are a lot of good legislation out there that we need to be working on, but the committee process stops it. Now, I know that there are, if we look at how the process is working, citizens don't mind or are more understanding when they see a bill get either passed or defeated on an up or down vote. But what's really frustrating is when they don't even get the public hearing, and that's what we've been trying to expose, and that's the transparency I've been focusing on this session.
Those last-minute bills, and I assume in the next few days we're going to be seeing a lot of those midnight efforts that'll take place.
Yeah, unfortunately, the last week of the session is where you get a lot of I'll use the most polite term possible, questionable legislation coming through. There was a faith healing bill introduced just a couple days ago, and its intentions are good, but I think it leaves a lot of problems. And so if we try and ramrod the faith healing exemption bill through, I think we're going to put parents at risk of being charged with criminal neglect and abuse of their children if they try and use prayer and spiritual healing to care for their sick or injured child. So we need to be careful when we do stuff like that, and trying to get a quick fix here at the end of the session, I don't think is the proper way to do important legislation like that.
It's 8:26. Our guest is Representative Ron Nate. He's from Rexburg, and he's joining us this morning talking about the upcoming close of legislative session in Boise. I've got a question, and I guess it probably nags a lot of people, but are we dealing with a power base in the state that is too beholden, let's say, to a donor class and not enough to the public?
Well, Bill, it sure feels like that sometimes. That there are some good representatives here that are here to work for the people, and they're responsive to their constituents. But we live in a representative republic, and the consent of the people is supposed to be filtered through representatives. That protects the minority interests as well. Protects us from, as Madison called, the tyranny of the majority. So we filter it through representatives. But when the process is broken so that representatives can't get their legislation heard, or representatives aren't allowed to have hearings, then the process gets broken. And so there are some here that really want to preserve that committee process, because that's where special interests, that's where lobbyists, that's where the cronyism thrives, because they have control over the process and the flow of legislation. But the flow of legislation ought to be from the bottom up, not from the top down. And so that's what we're working towards.
We have about a minute before the break, and I want to pass along to people who are tuning into News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com this morning. The representative is willing to take some of your telephone calls in the next segment of the program. I know there are people who likely would have questions and perhaps comments. As we get near the end, is there a specific day that we're going to be wrapping up? Is that already settled?
From the day one of the session, they've been targeting March 24th, this next Friday. I've heard some signals that we might be going beyond that, and we have plenty of time to get the citizens' work done here. We don't need to be extending the session. However, that being said, I'm happy to stay here as long as it takes to make sure that we do what is right for the citizens, that we make sure that the tax cuts that that we ought to be doing actually get done, and that we make sure that we stop some of this bad legislation. So I'm I'm happy to be here and represent the people, and willing to take as long as we need to get it right.
We've got more coming up with State Representative Ron Nate just after the half-hour break. We're coming up at 8:30. It's 40. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Temperatures the next couple of days near 70, but look, it's not over yet, which means you may still be having an issue or two, and you may have one before the end of the season when it comes to heating your home. If that be the case, you need to call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric in Burley. The team at Ramsey's is going to make sure the job is done right, and they'll do it right the first time. Problem-free, cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. The telephone number 678-0459, 678-0459. That's Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. We've got a few more minutes with State Representative Ron Nate this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Bill Colley answering the telephone. Speaking of which, if you've got a question or comment for the representative, the telephone number, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. You can also email me, of course, at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That's bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. Representative, here we are with, as you're pointing out, it may be just a week before we wrap up. I suspect that when all of this is said and done and people are doing the postmortems on the legislative session, will there be any pluses? I mean, I think that periodically that the Republicans do vote together as a group and do see some things eye to eye. I was thinking the other day about the bill on taxation on gold and silver. So it's not exactly the media portrays this as being a constant battle, but that's not always the case.
That's right. There will be some pluses. That one about removing the capital gains tax from gold and silver holdings, it's a constitutional bill. It is recognizing the right of the people to be able to hold on to their assets and not have it be taxed, because gold and silver is the only alternative currency that a state can have against the Federal Reserve note. So if we're not going to allow capital losses to be declared on our dollars, on our Federal Reserve notes, then we shouldn't be taxing the capital gains on gold and silver, which is the alternative. But another plus that might come out of this, and I'm still hopeful, is the grocery tax repeal. It's a modest tax cut compared to what we could have done, but that might be a plus. If we look at recent history, we've had revenues come in, above projections year in and year out, but our spending in Idaho has outpaced even those revenues. That there is a tendency to spend it up around here. But there's a growing number of legislators like myself and some others that are really trying to follow the Republican platform. I ran on the issue of I'm only going to vote for legislation that's constitutional, that's economically efficient, and morally sound. And there's a growing number of us that are focused on those types of principles and following the platform. And I hope we can continue to grow and truly represent the people.
I know that in the last couple of election cycles, the party regulars have tried to give you a hard time or push you out of the way, but the more and more you keep winning elections or primaries, I'm going to guess you're going to be there for a while. At least you're planning on making a mark before you leave the office.
This is a citizen legislature. I'm a citizen. I have a real job. I have a family at home that loves me. I'm happy to do this work as long as the voters want to keep sending me here. But my livelihood and my pride is not tied up in being a legislator. I am, eager to do the work of the people, but I'll do it as long as they want me. And I think that there's a lot of similarly minded people around the state that are just here to do the work for the people and not in it for personal glory or anything like that.
We have a caller with us, and caller, you're on the air. Oh, I guess the caller decided to make, you may have just answered whatever the caller wanted to hear.
I'm sure that's what it was.
Well, that said, we talked earlier about the fact that we may see more and more people coming, and I think in the internet age, with the availability of social media and the like, that we're going to see. I mentioned in a newspaper column a few months ago that Well, you may be small in numbers right now, and I think one instead of calling you far right like the newspaper does, I think constitutionalist might be a better description. But I think this is just the beginning, and that we're going to see much more of you coming to Boise, in the sense that people can now bypass that mainstream media and get all of these details at other sources.
Absolutely. I think social media and the media that helps us get in touch with the voters, our growingfreedomidaho.com site is a place where uh, citizens can go and see what the bills are and what is being voted on. They can contact their legislators and the committee members, and so just being in touch with the people more really helps, and yeah, I guess we are constitutional, but we do follow the Republican platform. I know that they throw out labels to try and cast us as something more extreme, but we are actually, if you look historically, we're following the Republican platform. Those that are deviating from the platform are moving to the middle. And so I think it'd be appropriate to call us the Republicans in the House, Republicans in the Senate.
Is there a better name for those who aren't following?
I'll leave the labeling to creative folks like yourself.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your time today, and please keep us posted about what's going on.
Great. Thanks, Bill. It's a pleasure to be on here, and I'm happy to come on anytime you want me and take callers' questions and just fill you in on what's going on here in Boise.
We may have to do that after session finishes too, as well, so people can get a good understanding of what took place.
Sounds good, Bill. Thank you.
Take care, sir. Ron Nate joining us this morning. He's a state representative from Rexburg, spending a few minutes with us. He's got to get off to the floor shortly. There's legislation that has to be worked, and so he's on his way to have his say in all of that. We're at 40, and it's 8:40. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. We're talking firearms a bit later this morning as well, and a couple of notes on the way about something called St. Patrick's Day.